Philip Blackett. What a great conversation with Philip. Fascinating man. We start with agreeing. Can good people disagree? He wrote a book on that, just on disagree without disrespect. Is a very interesting take on it. We don't see that certainly today here in the States. We just see people just kind of digging in on points and not being a little open minded. But we go through his entrepreneurial journey, which is fascinating. He's from the Northeast, went to Harvard Business School, and he's with this cohort group to buy businesses. He ends up getting into a business that has to deal with the pandemic, a year after, and the kind of crash that happens there, and how he has to take a second job. His wife gets pregnant with twins, and how they have to stay, and how it just the turmoil and what happens there. And he turns it all around. He's written 6 books. He helps other people with dealing with that. It's just a wonderful story of, many people would just kind of push that off and not want to talk about it. But Philip's very open. This is what happened. This is, how I dealt with it. We also talk about neurodivergence and autism. He didn't speak until he was 4, and how he deals with that in business himself, and with his children as well. But it's a great conversation with Philip. Really enjoyed my time with him. Great perspective on discipline as well. Very interesting. Turning 40 years old. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Very excited to talk to you, Philip Blackett. Thanks so much for your time. Can good people disagree?
Yeah, of course.
How so?
Well, I think part of it, Joe, is understanding that, good people can still see things differently from other good people, right? And so I think that otherwise we will all be in agreement on everything. We will all have the same thoughts, the
Ugh.
same ways of going about things. It wouldn't be a very diverse place with regard to thought. Um, yeah, of course. I definitely agree that, to disagree with someone doesn't mean that one is good and one is bad. It's perfectly possible for 2 good people to disagree as well as 2 bad people to disagree.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be such a novel thought, right, Philip? I mean, but we just have, in today's society, especially here in the States, we just see these people kind of digging in, even when sometimes it's very clear that they're, I don't want to say wrong, but incorrect. But we just see it, and perhaps it's just a sense of, sensitizing us, or it's just over sensation, I guess I'm trying to say. But uh, it just seems that, I like to think that I'm open to any issue given new evidence.
Hmm. That's something that I agree with too, Joe. It's just, you know, when you come across new information, what you were making a decision on based on before, then now changes. Because you still have a response where it's like, okay, with this new information, do I accept it Do
Mm.
I consider it, or do I dismiss it and say what I had decided before still rules the day? And to some people, that would seem kind of odd. Where if you got new data, new information, you wouldn't be open to listening or hearing it
Mm.
out
Mm. Mm.
out of fear that it would change your original decision, which now then brings the question: is it more important for you to be right originally, even if you're proved wrong later on? Is it more important to
Mm.
double down on what you had said before because of fear of how you might be perceived or looked upon if you later say, oh, I realize I was wrong, or oh, the data now disproves what I said before, I must change my decision. I think you see a lot of that in our world today, that people would rather double down on what they had said originally in spite of new information that comes in later on.
Yeah, the ego gets in the way, doesn't it? Sometimes.
Absolutely. You said it.
Yeah.
That's the word. I think we get so caught up in our ego and we're trying to save face. We're trying to um, be more conscious of how we are perceived publicly, how we're viewed publicly. Maybe we have a significant audience or following or constituency that we are quote unquote held responsible for. That could play a role in how long you stay in that position of power. Um, Now it becomes a sense where I think for a lot of people, you're essentially trapped. And the problem with that is, Joe, is none of us are omniscient.
Mm.
None of us are all knowing to the point that we truly know everything, where we can truly be 100% right. We are limited, fallible human beings, that we didn't come out the womb knowing everything. We had to learn as we go, and we don't reach a point that we have learned everything.
Mm. Yeah, that's another issue. I mean, I always want to keep learning. That's one of the reasons why I have these conversations with interesting and smart people like yourself, Phil. So I, uh, the idea that, yeah, we can't learn anymore. We've learned enough. I also think about, I think about somebody like Malcolm X, for example. He wrote, by any means necessary, right? And he was an advocate for violence when he thought it was necessary. But then as he grew older, he softened that stance, right? He
Hmm.
went to Mecca and he went to other places, and he eventually softened and admitted that. I mean, so we have these early writings by him saying where violence can be necessary in certain areas, and then later we see a different we see a change there. So here's another example where you know I wasn't right then. I've got some more information. This is where I am now. I just don't we don't see it enough. Now, you had an argument with your sister, and your mother had to break it up, and it was during a holiday, I believe. And
Hmm.
this is what brought on you writing this book.
Yeah. It was 4th of July last year, and my sister's family came up here to Boston to visit my family, and my mom came up to visit her kids and her grandkids at the time as well. And yeah, we were in the living room having a conversation about a topic that, frankly, Joe, I don't remember
Mm,
exactly what we
doesn't
talked
matter.
about.
Yeah.
Right. But what I do remember is we were, as far as my sister and I, we were on opposite sides of the spectrum. And while we started to discuss, some would say debate, tomato,
Mm.
you know, um, my mom jumped in, basically said, hey, we're not going to have this. Basically, almost like a referee, but without the zebra shirt and the
Ah.
whistle, saying essentially, hey, we got fireworks coming up later on tonight. I don't want to see fireworks happening right now. And so while I appreciate the intent behind her action, just try to preserve the peace, try to keep us having a family memory that's worth looking at fondly in retrospect. Um, I saw it as a missed opportunity ultimately. That was the impact of it though, because I don't see my sister often, Joe. And I recognize that when you have those moments when you're spending time with someone in person, those can be significant because you can never tell when the next time you're going to see somebody. And I would also argue too, Joe, that in the world of social media, smartphones, text messaging, and that sort, some conversations are better had in person.
Mm,
They're better had face to face. And I believe that that was one of them because it involved a little more context, a little more understanding that you can't truly understand when you're going back and forth on a elongated text message conversation.
mm,
Um, and so I think for me, the question was in retrospect afterwards, Joe, was, if I had that type of experience with my sister and how I felt like it was a missed opportunity for her to get to know me better and vice versa, just because of the fear of disagreement and what can succeed after that, I wonder how many other people
mm.
around the country, around the world, are probably in a similar place that the quality of their relationships with people they care about, they're much more superficial than they would like it to be because we haven't figured out a way to navigate some of the more in-depth beyond the surface type of conversations that, yeah, it could provoke disagreement, but disagreement doesn't necessarily have to end the relationship. However, disrespect, that can.
Yeah.
So, how can we navigate disagreements respectfully? That's what prompted me to come up with the framework that embodies the book Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those Who Think, Believe, and Vote Differently from You.
Yeah, just by being open-minded and like we alluded to earlier, Philip, the ego gets in the way, and people dig in, and it would just be so nice every once in a while that we see a debate and somebody says, "You know what? I agree with you there. I didn't realize that." It's just very humbling. It's very, but it would maybe be shown as weakness and decisiveness, if it's a politician or whoever it may be. But I think more conversations like this help. But Philip, I want to go to your entrepreneurial journey for a moment to give some background and give some framework. It's a fascinating story. So take me back now. You're with some groups that when you're looking to buy a business. This is before your daughters, and you're looking at different ways of or different companies, and they're going to fund you or you're going to be CEO. Talk to me about that process there, about trying to select a company to own, to buy, to purchase.
Yeah, so part of the thing, Joe, when I was coming out of business school was just the thought of, this whole concept called search funds. Another concept is entrepreneurship through acquisition, where the thought process is as opposed to starting a business from scratch, you can essentially find a business to buy where you can come across investors or partners that can help you find a business to buy and can either provide you with the financial structure and support to do so, the legal support, um, due diligence, um, the search capacity as far as how you go about a search to find a business to buy. And so, yeah, I went through that process with a cohort of fellow searchers, they call us, um, to look across different industries, look across different cities, different regions, and try to find the right business for us. And I found the business that I thought was pretty unique. It was basically one that, managed and operated cemeteries in the New England region. Definitely not your typical window washing company, your typical landscaping company for sure. Um, and that was one that was interesting. It was a little bit smaller in size compared to what my investors were looking for, but it was unique enough for me to make me think that there was something here. Um, and just fast forward, even though it was something ultimately that wasn't the right fit for my investors, after my search, I still kept in touch with that company. I later found myself working there as a business manager. And then, during my time there, I just basically worked with the owner to say, hey, I know it didn't work out the first time around as far as us working to do business together, but maybe this time around it could. Um, and we were able to do that.
But you were ready to relocate. You and your wife had decided to, wherever this business that I'm going to purchase takes us away from New England, the Boston area, that you were going to go. But then something kept you there and you had to stay.
Hmm.
You got pregnant.
Well, not me, but my wife. But yes,
You plural.
together,
Yeah,
yes,
you
we got
plural.
yeah
Yeah,
together we got pregnant. I think, and we later found that there were
the
twins.
twins. Yeah.
And so I think part of it, Joe, was if it was one child, we probably would have moved forward with moving. I think this is because this is our first time around as parents, though, to basically uproot ourselves and what we were doing before as far as jobs, um, community that we were within, as far as like support system and that sort, potentially go somewhere that might even be out of nowhere, in the middle
Mm,
of nowhere,
mm,
on our own with two newborns seems really daunting for
yeah.
most people, right? It did so the case for us, especially because it's like, you have this business that I would buy. Does my wife do? Does she find work? Does she stay at home with two newborns and that sort? Not saying it's impossible. It just probably wasn't our ideal scenario we wanted to play out. So yeah, I think that once we found out that we were pregnant with twins, that played a big role where it basically came off during that search of saying, hey, I value more making sure that my family is in the right place. And if that means that we make our search a more localized search within the greater Boston area, then that's what we need to do. And we just make the best out of that one way or the other.
So your cohorts decide that, the businesses they didn't want to purchase, it didn't work out, and something happened and you reconnect with the owner of this cemetery business, and you become the business manager, and you eventually, well, tell me more about that, please.
Yeah, I think it was something where I had moved on from the search. I basically was like, okay, well, the search didn't end out the way that I wanted to. Um, I still need to support my family. So we need to move on. Like, it may not have worked the way we wanted to. We can't stay in our pity party for long. We have to figure out what's the next step for us as a family. Um, but at the same time, the owner of that business, he and I remained friends, stayed in touch. And essentially, what happened that brought us back together was actually a little bit of a tragedy, because there was a um, gas explosion that happened in that area where that business was located. I was thinking about him as a friend, concerned about his family and his business. I reached out to him and asked if everything was okay. He shared with me shortly afterwards that, things are, we're in a good place. Thank you for asking. Once we kind of figure all this stuff out regarding what just happened, things started to settle down a little bit. Love to catch up. And at the time, I was working in financial services, and I thought to myself, if we catch up, this is a business owner. I love to see how things are going. And I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, continue the friendship, and maybe there might be a business relationship as well if he could need financial services and that sort. But when we actually got together, it was probably more him pitching me
Mm.
than vice versa. And he was more interested to see how we can continue to work together. And I thought, given the prospects of what I was working on at the time, working alongside him in that type of business seemed more appealing to me, given where I was coming from as far as a business background, than what I was currently doing. Um, so I took up on that opportunity, and I said yes.
Yeah, you were looking at it more as an opportunity to offer some of your, yeah, financial services. And so was he looking to exit the business? Is he older? What was his story?
Yeah, he was older. He had run that business for a number of years, and I think he saw a lot of potential as far as us working together. In that, you know, as I got to become more acquainted with the business, more familiar with it, how it operated, and that sort, I think he saw me as a potential successor for sure.
So you come on board, Philip, and you're the business manager, and things are going reasonably well. And then, of course, pandemic happens.
hmm Everything was fine until pandemic, right? Is definitely the story for many, almost I would say millions of small
Mm,
businesses.
mm.
Everything was in a good place until this pandemic take place. So yeah, if we basically were coming in. I recently had bought the business. I was already anticipating certain strategies and tactics to put in place to essentially double the business, potentially within 12 months. We had contracts that were basically getting finalized with new customers that would significantly grow our sales. A lot of things were on the come up, which is what attracted me about the business opportunity to begin with. But once the pandemic happened, um, we experienced a number of things that we were hoping were going to pan out that didn't. A lot of new customers that we were planning on coming on board changed their minds, given the scenario, the new circumstances, right? New
Mm.
information. Um, and we basically, as far as the business is concerned, um, was navigating significant ups and downs from that time the pandemic started for the next few years afterwards, primarily just to survive, to make sure that we can service our customers well to the best of our ability, to provide stability for our employees to the best of our ability as well. But it wasn't easy by any means.
Certainly not. And you, I mean, you found yourself out there cutting grass, Philip. I mean, you had to actually do a lot of the work because there was staff shortage at a particular point. You took yourself off of payroll. You were working another job. I mean, the life of an entrepreneur in these hard times is so very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's one where I looked at it as akin to my family.
Mm,
And as a father and as a husband now, it's the thought that you do what it takes to make sure that you survive. At the very least, you didn't want it to be something that you just, the minute adversity came in, you just quit. You left people hanging. It was more so saying, hey, you know, whatever sacrifices we need to make, even if it means me taking it on the chin a number of times for the sake of my team, um, you do whatever it takes
yeah.
because you want it to, to go well for people. And if that means, taking yourself off of payroll and paying everyone else before you pay yourself, or not pay yourself at all for a number of
Mm,
months,
mm,
and to cover your own expenses, you take on a second job. So now you're doing double duty as far as running a business and doing a job on the side on the same day. Um, or in the sense that even while you're working the business you have, saying to yourself, hey, we might not be in a position to afford another employee. So I'll go out there and I'll help cut the grass and I'll help, put the caskets in the ground. I'll help do the actual field work as well alongside my team members. So they don't just see you as just somebody behind a desk. It's like, we've seen Philip, he's helped us do the actual work as well. Might not be as skilled as everyone else, but at
mm.
least he puts in his best effort to help everyone out.
And then it came kind of, I think you said it was August, and, you can't make payroll, and one of the biggest contracts you have decides not to renew.
hmm
And you were given some advice by the previous owner about how to tell the employees, not a day. I only talk about this to anybody who's listening to kinda how they can cope with it. They're not alone. I mean, these hard times will come.
Yeah, I think that arguably that was the hardest Friday of my career. Definitely one of the hardest days in my working career in general, for sure. Um, because you never wanted that to happen. You never wanted it to come down to where you couldn't take care of payroll for everyone. that you had to deliver bad news, that essentially the business had run its course, and trying to help people navigate what their futures are like now after such news. Um, and then also understanding that, when you're sharing that to a significant group of people, um, you have no idea necessarily exactly how people are going to respond in real
Mm,
time.
mm.
And so it was one that, you had to be an adult, go and share the news, answer any questions to the best of your ability. Um, but then also have some sort of transition plan as far as how you go about things afterwards, knowing that this significantly changes where we go as a team and as a business going forward.
So the lessons learned here, Philip, you have a list, and one of the big things. So I work in technology space, and we're a managed service provider, and they work on fixed price. We'll take care of everything at a fixed price. Now that didn't seem to work actually in that industry.
No, because I think part of it was, even during the pandemic, we had a number of contracts with a number of customers that basically said, for this fixed price each month, we'll take care of all these services. But we didn't have something embodied in the contract that says, okay, once you get past a certain level of activity, that there needs to be additional compensation included to help us pay for the additional services beyond a certain level, so that this contract no longer becomes profitable for us. And so what happened is, with the pandemic, sad to say, the number of barrels we had to take on each month increased significantly.
Mm,
And what that meant was, you had a fixed price, but your work for that price significantly ballooned, which means you had to spend much more in expenses for labor, for gas, especially if people remember in the pandemic, gas was significantly higher,
mm,
and being able to get the gas needed for your trucks, for your lawn landscaping equipment, for your vehicles, your heavy machinery, diesel fuel, not regular. So that was even more expensive just to begin
mm,
with than regular
mm.
gasoline. Um, Also, the wear and tear of your equipment. So your maintenance expense was going. Everything was going up in addition to inflation. And so basically, you don't have to go to Harvard Business School to realize that if you're getting paid a certain price, but all your expenses keep increasing, at some point, what you're doing is now unprofitable and deemed essentially unsustainable if it continues this way.
Speaking of Harvard, did it do a good job of preparing you for something like this? I don't know how it could.
Well, I think part of it is, understanding to what you talked about before. One of the things about Harvard Business School that was helpful is, you have to make decisions in spite of having imperfect and incomplete information.
Mm,
So we just talked about earlier about, when you get new information, you make new decisions, you make new perspectives and opinions based off what you now know. And so oftentimes, if anything, the most common answer we have in class is, it depends.
hmm.
And so I think it was helpful for me to be able to look at this and say, hey, okay, the situation has changed. Okay, things are not panning out the way I thought originally. We have to adjust. Otherwise, we won't be here. And so it's almost a credit for us to last as long as we did in the midst of all that the pandemic brought, by us trying to flex and adapt, and be as resilient as we possibly can, despite all these things that were outside of our control coming out of nowhere and impacting us more negatively than positively.
Mm. A couple of takeaways from the Jeff Bezos book there from Amazon was how he empowers. I just spoke to somebody who wrote another book about it. How he empowers all his managers to make decisions, and he has a magic number, a percentage that if the decision maker can have 70% of all the information needed to make that decision, then if it fails, they won't be punished at all, or they won't be reprimanded. Punished, a terrible term. But so the number for him was 70%. If you impossible to get all 100, and if you try to get 100%, you may waste your opportunity, and anything lower is not enough. I wonder what you think about that.
I think it's sound advice, Joe. I think, like I said before, we are all not omniscient.
Hmm.
We are every day making decisions on things on what we feel we're at least 70% confident on. None of us is 100% confident that we'll wake up the next day.
Yeah.
But if we do wake up the next day, then we can go about our days certain ways, assuming that, we have enough confidence that this is going to pan out. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And
Yeah.
so I think that, from a management perspective, I think it's sound because at some point, you don't want people succumbing to analysis paralysis either.
Right.
You're empowering people. You want people to make decisions because you can't make all the decisions as the CEO yourself. You can't necessarily have a significant business as a one man shop. Um, you have to have people that you trust to make decisions for you and for the benefit of the business. But if they don't feel empowered and comfortable making those decisions off some sort of threshold of knowledge behind the situation, you're not going to move anywhere.
Hmm. Philip, in retrospect, what would you have done different, if anything?
So I think part of me ramping up for growth was preparing for those new customers. And a lot of it meant I had to prepare from a personnel, a vehicle, and equipment standpoint. What I think I would have done, at least, clearly I couldn't stop the pandemic. But what I probably could have done differently is I would more so not pull the trigger on bringing on more equipment, more
Hmm.
personnel, more vehicles, especially on the equipment and vehicle standpoint that involved me getting into further debt,
Ah.
um, that I'd be responsible for until those customers actually panned out. I think that's one of those things that I realized, like, hey, like, it was a very rosy, very optimistic, very encouraging picture we were coming into play. And if everything panned out, I probably would still be running the business today.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, understanding the downside and doing a better job to protect ourselves if the downside, worst case scenario played out, I think that that would have been very helpful too.
It's always a gamble, Philip. Do you hire, then get the customers? But if you get the customers or the clients and you don't have the staff, you might not be able to service them. So
Right.
there's that delicate dance there where you have to monitor that. And oh, what's the book? Is it the E Myth where he describes we all get like entrepreneurial brain damage? Is that the one where
It might be.
yeah, or he calls something like that where we want to bring that on. I mean, it's I remember when I first started my business in the 90s, and I all these myths around. I remember my friend saying must be so nice not to have a boss. I said, I have more bosses than I've ever had before. Every one of my clients is my boss. My employees to some level are my boss. The banks, the vendors, the idea that you can kind of have a business and not report to anyone is incorrect.
Hmm.
And hopefully with what we have and what we learn, we can make great decisions. And I'm 55 years old now. I was in my 20s then. I certainly would make different decisions now than I would then. What other lessons anybody who's listening, Philip, can you impart on them about running, owning, buying a business?
So I think one of the big things is really adopting a grow or die mentality.
Mm,
If you want to have a business just to have it and to keep it steady state, um, it's probably not the right way to go.
mm,
And the reason why I say that is because even before we have inflationary times as of late, recently, it should be an okay assumption to have that all your expenses are likely going to increase over time. And if you don't have your revenue increasing at least higher than the rate that your expenses are
Mm.
increasing, you're actually making your way backwards. And if
Hmm.
you do it long enough going backwards, you'll essentially get to a place where you can't cover all your expenses,
Mm.
and then you won't be in business long. And so having a grow or die mentality to me says when you come into a business, you're looking at this as, in that position you're in, your primary job is how do I grow the business? And how do I grow it profitably?
Mm.
Don't just grow just for revenue's sake, just to see a higher top line, but more so in the sense that how you're growing it is enough to cover all your expenses clearly, have some money left over that you can either invest in the business, do something nice for your team, take care of yourself and your situation since you are a shareholder of that business, um, or just have available in case, God forbid, a worst case scenario happens where sometimes it's helpful to have some cash on the side to help you better adjust. I
Mm.
don't think anybody would not want to be in the cash position of a Berkshire Hathaway,
Mm.
where the problem you're having is more so, um, I just don't see any companies that are worth acquiring right now. So I'm just going to keep these hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in banks, just accumulating more interest, especially now at 5+% interest. And that being seen as a cushion, a war chest for you, um, that gives you a greater sense of safety and stability versus the opposite.
Cash flow management. Yeah. It oh my goodness. Yeah, because without it you can't do much. And you also, Philip, write about AI. And I like your take on it about how it could help in your job, your career. I'm sure even in entrepreneurialism, how you feel that it lets you spend more time with your clients and let AI do some of the kind of other tasks that take up a lot of your time.
hmm I mean, I think that AI, artificial intelligence, is essentially this generation's social media.
Mm.
I think it's this generation's dial up internet,
Hmm.
this generation's automobile, personal computer, railroad, steam engine,
Mm.
electricity, the wheel. It is a significantly new technology that will essentially change the way we go about things going forward. And it is a new technology that can serve us, that can help us become more productive than we were before. The real question, though, is are we going to utilize it to its full degree to learn about it, to figure out how to adapt it and include it in what we already do, and to commit towards mastering it?
Mm.
So that's something that you are proficient at to the point where you can equip and empower others you work alongside so that they're much more skilled at it. So that collectively, it's not just a one person show running AI in your company or in your organization. It's you have a whole team that's empowered to do so.
Mm.
Um, I think that's part of the key there because even as the CEO of NVIDIA, a publicly traded company that is clearly in the AI trenches and is clearly profiting from it,
Yes.
once said, um, it's not AI that's going to take your job, Joe. It's the person that knows AI
Mm.
that's going to take your job. And so I think that that's very sound advice and is a fair, honest warning for those that think that it's just a fad and it's not worth paying attention to.
Hmm. I mean, I'm using the AI so often, the open AI. I just, for the most smallest things that, like you say, like if I have to write an email and I have some points to bring out, and it's a great first draft, I ask it. It just, I just, I can't imagine now that why people wouldn't want to use it. I mean, I see people look at it as a threat, but we can name any significant technology that people saw as a threat. We can name even the World Wide Web. We can name even the automobile, right? All the horse trainers and horse industry was threatened by that. The light bulb was threatened by, the candle and the, industry. And um, it's significant, and I believe it's going to help. There's going to be those that try to, misuse it and abuse it, just like any technology. But I think overall, I think it's going to help. And um, I wonder if back during those tough times with that business, would AI helped you? You think?
You know, last time I checked, I don't think robots are at the point where they can dig graves, Joe.
Hmm.
So I think that, we had a primarily services business, um, and the work we completed, it required our hands and our physical labor to do.
Interesting.
So it's more blue collar in nature. I think there probably could have still been some functions and jobs to be done that AI could have really facilitated and helped. I think at the end of the day, the ultimate fulfillment of those services required people to do their jobs with their hands. And I don't think we're at a point right now just yet where we actually have robots doing that type of work
Hmm.
and doing it either more efficient, less costly, um, more profitable than the status quo. So I think to a certain degree, yes, but not completely.
And I don't care what anybody says, there's no way an AI would have forecasted the pandemic. So, it yeah, I just wonder. I wonder where it's going to go. I think it's only going to get better.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do believe that. So, where does your spirituality play a role in your life, Philip?
Um, I mean, it's everything, Joe. I think it's, I think for a lot of people, you have to come to grips with what essentially makes you who you are,
Hmm.
right? And I think that for many people, it can be a number of things as far as how they identify themselves. And I think for me, my faith is essentially first and foremost what's most important to me
Hmm.
and how I best identify myself, and is a daily influence on how I think, how I act, what I say, how I go about living my life.
Yeah, you've got a lot of great. Your social media is great, Philip, and you do spend some time going through some verses that are significant to you, and what impact it makes to you. And I could just see how important that is to you, and it shapes you, and it helps you, guides you almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. So I started my business in the '90s. I'm from New Haven, just a little south of you,
Hmm.
and I was working far too much, 14-hour days. You're no stranger to that, that's for sure. And um, I found I was eating poorly, wasn't exercising anymore. I found myself eventually at 340 pounds. And
Wow.
the doctor said to me, if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. My oldest was just born at that point. So I spent the next 7 months, lost about 130 pounds. People always ask me how, like there's some quick answer, like there's some, one, just what did you do? And so my only answer to them is discipline.
Hmm.
That's how I lost it. I got focused, I got, willpower, and I lost the weight. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Philip Blackett.
um, I guess that's the $1 million question here, right?
Maybe.
So I think I think when you think about discipline, it's often the time. I think one quote best said it like discipline, to paraphrase, is the commitment to do what you said you were going to do, even if the emotion you had when you first initially committed has gone away.
Mm.
So it's no longer like the thing to do. It's no longer the popular thing to do. You're no longer on the emotional high when you initially said it. It's days, if not weeks or months, since you first decided to do it. Everyone's moved on with their lives. No one's congratulating you, liking and commenting on your post when you initially announced it. And yet, and still, you're still doing your walk each day. You're still doing your reading each morning. You're still coming to work each day.
Hmm.
And I just think of it as like any endeavor that I've been successful at, and even those that things didn't pan out the way I wanted to, and I still learn from the failure of it. It's a product of having discipline to go about things the right way, the best of your ability, and being consistent with it.
Hmm. I wonder, did you have a different definition of a role, I should say, of discipline before this entrepreneurial journey? Was it significantly different? Was it similar given your spiritual background, and etc.?
Not necessarily. I think things really panned out on the uptick for me, like back in like eighth grade,
Hmm.
because I think before eighth grade, I was just trying to be somebody that just fit in. And oftentimes, to fit in is like you go to the lowest common denominator of the group. And oftentimes, that means slacking off,
Mm.
trying to be the most social person, the most popular person. I don't know, certain things that people do nowadays still. Um, and really, I think I was at a point where I couldn't really afford to do that because, I grew up with a single mother trying to raise myself and my sister with the help of our grandparents at the time. And for us to go to this type of school we were going to, it required a lot.
Mm.
And so I didn't have a luxury to say, oh, it's no big deal. You can just slack off. Um, I was also too young, Joe, to go about getting a job to help support my family.
Mm.
But my job was essentially to do the very best I could in the classroom. And that was quote unquote my work ethic
Mhm.
to help bring in some sort of quote unquote salary to support the family. And I think that turnaround from seventh grade, just trying to fit in, to eighth grade, being valedictorian in my class, I think that's where a light bulb hit in my head, where it was just the thought of like, I wonder how far we can go with this if we stay disciplined.
Hmm.
I wonder how far we can go if we don't pay attention so much as far as what the people around you say about you, and you focus more on the discipline you instill in yourself based off how you see yourself ultimately. And I think from there, I think, was I perfect in that? No, of course not. But at least it gave me some sort of guiding direction, some sort of compass or North Star to help lead me in the right direction as I continue to get older through high school, through college. Um, and yeah, early adulthood as far as like leading into now being a husband and a father now.
Hmm. And talk to me about, the impact of autism and neurodivergence.
Well, yeah, I think that's another part of the story going back to seventh grade is that um, I was nonverbal until around 4 years old,
Wow.
which now it's interesting because now I'm a huge fan and doing a lot of reading of a very famous um, teacher, philosopher, economist. Some people call um, a guy by the name of Thomas Sowell, and he wrote a book that talked about experience he had, I think, with his own child that didn't speak until right around 4 years old too.
Mm.
um and what might have happened if he had gotten diagnosed wrongly. Um, I don't know. I see some similarities. I think for me, it was clear, or it became clear to my family that something wasn't clearly right for me not to be verbal during that time. And I think autism coming out, where we looked at that much differently in the 80s versus now.
Mm.
I do remember speech therapy classes and stuff like that, like doing some sort of extra work, additional work outside of school to help me come closer to where the class was. And I think even now, like as a father on the autism spectrum that has, two kids that have that diagnosis, and just kind of seeing things full circle, where initially I felt guilty about it, feeling like I gave them something
Mm.
that was almost like a disease, but then also seeing like, hey, like reflecting how things were when you were growing up and what made a difference to you. And what that difference was, I had somebody or somebodies um, that were dedicated for me to be the best I could. And they exhibited that through unconditional love and a great deal of patience, um, and a focus on really challenging me mentally to see how far we can go. And so I think now it's just kind of full circle where, as a father, being able to do that for my kids and that sort, um, trying to instill in them what my grandparents and my mother had done for me when I was their age.
Hmm. Yeah, it must be something to kind of see it happening with your children as well. But it also, you're better prepared for it. You understand it better. And like you say, we treat it a lot differently now.
Hmm.
What motivates you, Philip?
Turning 40 this year, I think because I know life expectancy for many supposedly has increased over time. I think some people could say that life expectancy could be hovering near 80 for us here in America, which, if that was the case on average, then me turning 40 would sound like I've reached my halfway point. Now, that may change if we have some significant medical advances, new technologies that enhance and, take on some personal discipline as far as like how I go about my health, to help extend the possibility of me going beyond 80. But I think that, one, not looking at 40 as the opportunity to have a midlife crisis, but more so to say, listen, let's take inventory of how the first 40 years were like.
Hmm.
And in reflection and in gratitude of the fact that, one, you're still here, because not many people, not everyone makes it to 40. But then two, be able to see from your past education, your experiences, the moments, the good, the bad, the ugly. Um, what have you learned at that point, and how you applied it to arguably the second half of your life, with more of a legacy component leading you,
Hmm.
as far as what do you want to impart to your family, your kids? How do you want to positively impact and influence the next generation that comes after you? Especially in a world today that everyone has a platform to share any particular principles, values, or worldview that they deem is something that other people ought to adopt. And we're in a position now that it doesn't really help to stay quiet, because we tend to be in a place where the loudest person that can say what he or she wants to say, and the most frequent, often comes off as truth to people.
Hmm.
The problem is, if that is actually not the case, is actually not true, and you have more people believing a lie, um, then that comes off in a sense like, are you playing a part by staying a quote unquote innocent bystander in the process?
Hmm.
So I think part of it is just the motivation is just saying, hey, with everything that I've gone through over the past 40 years, still surviving that, learned a lot, grown a lot, and that sort of thing. Um, how do you want these next 40 years to go, in terms of not only taking care of yourself and your family, but also trying to be a good example for others in the process?
You are coming to terms with your legacy, young man. I'll call you a young man. You're 15 years old, younger than me, but yeah, that's what it seems.
I think I would agree there, Joe.
Yeah. And so now you help others, given your vast experience and your authorship, you help others with kind of consulting and helping them through kind of their journey, their entrepreneurial journey, correct?
Right. It's one of the things I do for sure.
Tell me who's a great candidate for something like that, Philip?
I think I tend to resonate a lot with business owners that were like me.
Mm.
Um, they're established business owners that have a business that probably could be seven figures in revenue. I'd say at least a minimum 250,000. That is, up to 10 million in revenue. That was the realm I was in. And I think oftentimes I reflect and say, hey, somebody said sometimes, who you're most equipped is who you used to be.
Hmm.
And so I think that business owners that are growing an established business, they want to grow it. They're friendly, they're coachable, they're open to new strategies to help take on that grow or die mentality, um, regardless of industry. Um, I think those are the type of people I'd like to work with and see how I can be of benefit to them and to help them essentially grow the business of their dreams, before life happened.
It must be real rewarding.
Yeah, because I think a lot of it comes out almost like full circle, Joe, as we talked about before with regards to my kids. You kind of go through something yourself, and then now you see some other people that you care about that are going through something similar, and you don't want to keep what you learned to yourself because then it's almost like, what's the point of you going through what you had gone through? And
Hmm.
so it's kind of similar where if you're seeing some things that you recognize and that um, could lead somebody down the wrong path, you know, shame on me if I don't at least speak up and share, hey, don't go that route. Watch out for that pothole. There's a better way. And so I think that's kind of where I extend that going forward.
Hmm. How do you measure success, Philip?
I know a lot of people have different definitions of it. I think how I look at success is more so with everything that's been, provided to me as far as what to work with. Um, did I do the very best I could with what has been given?
Hmm.
And it's almost like to the sense where I think about, a biblical parable dealing with the parable of the talents, where essentially three people got a number of talents given to each. One got one got two, one got five. And the person that gave those talents was going to come back after a trip and they was going to see what did you actually do with what you've been given. When that person came back, they reported on those three people. The person with five talents had worked through those five talents, doubled it. The person with two talents worked through it, doubled it. The person with one talent, he hid it. He hid it in the ground. He didn't do anything with it. And the person reporting back was like, you could at least try to put it somewhere where it can gain interest, if not double it. Wasn't any growth to it. Take that talent from you and give it to the person that actually utilized it to double it, because that person was a better steward of what he had to work with.
Hmm.
And so I think that taking the lesson from there is understanding that, hey, like being a good and faithful steward of what God has given me, to the best of my ability, that to me is what I think success is, at least to me.
Hmm. Oh, that's nice. That's a very refreshing answer, Philip. I was so excited when we set this up. Your journey is an interesting one and one that we see happen, but not many people talk about it, so you talk about it and you say, here's what happened. There were some things that were out of my control, there were some things that were in my control, but this is the lessons learned, and you're taking that further and you're helping people with it. You're author as well. I just enjoy your social media. I enjoy what you stand for. I really, really, really appreciate you, Philip. Thank you so much for your time today. If anybody listening, how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate having the opportunity to have a conversation with you, Joe. For those that are listening in that want to touch base after this, if you're interested in reading some of the books I've written, they're available on Amazon. Just look up my name, Philip Blackett, spelled Philipblackett. There you can see all 6 books that I have published there and see which ones make sense or is a good fit for you to read. You can also go to my website, philipblackett.com, or look me up on social media. Just look me up by my name, Philip Blackett, on Facebook, X, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'll
Yeah,
be there.
you're on all of them with great, great content. Philip, thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in the greater Boston area, I hope we get together and, have a cup of tea.
That'd be great, Joe. I look forward to it.
Philip, you be well.
You as well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.